If you like our short stories, please like, comment, and subscribe. Snow swirled beneath an iron-gray sky, the wind humming a low, mournful tune. Esther Montgomery hugged her wool coat tighter around her shoulders and pushed open the door to Memory Lane, a cramped antique shop at the edge of town. The overhead bell chimed softly, echoing in the silence. It was Christmas Eve, and the rest of the world seemed content to huddle by warm fireplaces or gather around festive trees. But Esther had come here on a singular mission: to acquire the final piece in her growing collection of rare and peculiar curiosities. Henry Cooper, the shop's owner, leaned across the glass countertop. His thin silver hair glinted in the dim light, and his voice cracked with age. "You're late, Esther," he said, half smiling. "For a moment I thought you'd changed your mind." Esther brushed a layer of snow off her boots, then gave a soft chuckle. "I've been thinking about it all week, Henry. But you know I can't resist something with a bit of history." Henry pursed his lips. "This one has more than just a bit, I'm afraid. I'm told it carries quite a curse, though there are some who call it a gift." He bent behind the counter and emerged holding a small black velvet box. "Are you certain you want to see it?" Esther's heart fluttered. She'd heard rumors of a strange ornament rumored to bring eternal holiday cheer to anyone who dared possess it. At least that was the official version. Unofficially, whispers hinted at tragedy and loss among those who had owned it. But to Esther, freshly widowed and longing for a hint of magic, any magic, this was worth the risk. "Of course," she said, voice trembling with anticipation. Henry lifted the lid, revealing a glass orb of stunning craftsmanship. Translucent swirls of crimson and gold ribbons coiled beneath its surface. Candlelight from the shop's single lamp played across the orb, making it seem as though something alive shifted within. Esther couldn't take her eyes off it. It was beautiful in a way she'd never experienced before, as if it reached directly into her heart, promising comfort, warmth, and maybe even hope. Yet there was an undercurrent of unease. The air felt charged, crackling with invisible electricity. For the briefest of moments, Esther thought she saw a face reflected in the ornament's swirling design, an unrecognizable face twisted in silent anguish. "That's—" she swallowed, forcing a smile. "Remarkable." Henry glanced around the shop as though wary of unseen ears. "The man who sold it to me claimed it was made centuries ago by an excommunicated craftsman who dabbled in dark practices. He was rumored to be connected to forces best left alone. Some say it grants eternal cheer. Others say it traps souls in its reflection." His voice dropped to a hush. "I don't usually entertain these stories, Esther. You know me. But this one is different." Esther felt her pulse quicken. "I'm not afraid of old legends, Henry. I'll pay whatever you're asking." With a final concerned glance, Henry closed the box and slid it across the counter. "Be careful, Esther. Sometimes the stories you ignore are the ones that come back to haunt you." Back home, snow crunched beneath her feet as Esther climbed the porch steps of her Victorian-era house. The structure loomed under the glow of flickering Christmas lights. She paused at the threshold, the old door creaking in protest as she pushed it open. Inside, the warmth was immediate. The faint scent of pine from the grand Christmas tree filled the parlor. Tinsel glimmered, old-fashioned ornaments dangled from every branch, and decorative candles flickered in glass holders. She wasted no time. Setting aside her coat, Esther carefully opened the velvet box. She retrieved the ornament with reverent hands and hung it on the tree's highest branch. A gentle shimmer of candlelight danced across it, as if coaxing out hidden shapes within. From certain angles, she imagined she saw fleeting faces peering back at her. Illusions, she told herself. Reflections of the flickering fireplace or the play of shadows in the room. Still, her heart thrummed with a peculiar blend of excitement and dread. Through the hush of the house, Esther heard something like a whisper. So soft she dismissed it as the wind, or so she tried to convince herself. It was nearly midnight when a sharp rap at the door startled her from a light doze. She hurried over, finding her neighbor and dear friend, Gillian Reed, standing on the porch. Pale from the cold, Gillian cradled a mug of hot chocolate in both hands. "Esther, I came to see if you needed anything." Gillian's eyes glanced over the threshold. "I know this is your first Christmas Eve alone, without Frank." Esther softened, the memory of her late husband tugging at her heart. She'd loved him deeply. Losing him so suddenly a year ago had left a cavernous emptiness inside her. "Oh, Gillian," she breathed, stepping aside to invite her friend in. "Your timing is perfect. I just brought home something new." They settled in the parlor, the glow of the Christmas tree illuminating Gillian's features. Gillian noticed the ornament almost immediately. "That's lovely," she said, squinting. Her expression shifted from admiration to a subtle frown. "Where on earth did you find it?" Memory lane, Esther replied, her tone holding a kind of pride. Henry said it's very old, maybe 17th century. Apparently it has quite the backstory. She paused, feeling a sudden twinge of unease. I think it's supposed to bring eternal holiday cheer. Jillian's gaze lingered on the orb. Its swirling red and gold seemed to have an almost hypnotic pull. Something about it feels off, she murmured, rubbing her arms as though chilled. I know how you love unusual antiques, but just be careful. Esther let out a gentle laugh, trying to shake off the creeping sense of foreboding. Oh, please. If anything, it's a reminder that there's still wonder in the world. It's Christmas, after all. They shared a brief hug before Jillian left. Alone again, Esther found her thoughts drifting to Frank and the emptiness his absence created. If this ornament could in some way connect her to the magic of Christmas, even if it was a leap of faith, she was willing to believe. The grandfather clock struck midnight with a resonant chime. The house had grown impossibly silent. One by one, the candles on the mantel sputtered and died, as though snuffed by unseen fingers. Esther sat up straighter, every nerve alive with apprehension. The only source of light came from the Christmas tree. Its reflection wavered in the glass surface of the ornament, or so she assumed, until she realized the light was pulsing from inside the orb itself. She rose, stepped slow as if dragged by gravity toward that crimson glow. There was a faint hum in the air, a vibration that rattled her bones. She peered closer, her breath fogging the glass. Her own faint reflection looked back, wide-eyed, disquieted. Then, behind her reflection, another face appeared. A gaunt visage with hollow eyes, lips parted in a wordless plea. She gasped and stumbled backward. The face was gone the instant she blinked. Heart racing, Esther pressed a hand to her chest. Perhaps she was tired, overly emotional. She tried to laugh it off, but her pulse continued to hammer. Something was stirring in that ornament, something ancient and unnameable. Standing alone in the silence, she felt a pang of regret and a flicker of thrill. She had come this far. Tomorrow was Christmas Day, and she had a new piece of history decorating her tree. Whatever that meant, she would face it. Her mind drifted to her lost husband, to the memory of him placing the star on top of the tree each year. With a trembling smile, she whispered, "Merry Christmas, Frank," and turned out the lights. Yet in the darkness, the ornament's faint red gleam persisted, glowing like an ember that refused to die. Christmas morning arrived on the wings of a relentless wind. Pale sunlight filtered through the frosted windows, illuminating the parlor in an otherworldly glow. Esther Montgomery awoke with a faint headache and an unsettling recollection of the previous night. She shook off her unease and made her way downstairs, determined to embrace the holiday warmth, even if it came cloaked in uncertainty. Upon entering the parlor, her gaze fell immediately on the ornament. It hung at the highest branch, shimmering with flecks of gold and crimson, as if it had captured the morning sun. She stepped closer, heart pounding. In the daylight, the ornament looked almost innocent, devoid of the phantom faces or eerie hums she'd experienced in the midnight hours. Nevertheless, a nagging sense of dread gnawed at her. Had she really seen a spectral face in the orb's reflection last night, or was it just the product of her grief-laden imagination? Christmas without Frank was painfully lonely, after all. It was possible that her longing, her desperation for some form of connection, was playing tricks on her mind. She pushed the thought aside and busied herself in the kitchen, brewing a pot of spiced coffee and preparing a modest breakfast. Though her appetite was minimal, she ate mechanically, convincing herself the day would be as peaceful as any Christmas could be for a woman alone. Midway through her meal, the phone rang, its shrill tone cutting through the silence. "Hello?" she answered, pressing the receiver to her ear. "Esther, it's Jillian. How are you holding up?" Her friend's voice was brimming with concern. Esther allowed herself a smile. "Better now. I was just about to invite you over. Would you like to share some coffee?" A pause. "Yes, actually. I'd like that. I've been thinking about you, especially after seeing that ornament." Esther tried to keep her tone light. "You're worried about me over a piece of glass?" "Not just any piece of glass," Jillian said quietly. "I can't explain it, but when I looked into it last night, I felt something strange. Call me superstitious, but I had nightmares about it when I got home." Esther felt a chill snake up her spine. "It's Christmas. Let's not dwell on nightmares. Come over soon, all right?" They hung up, and Esther stood there, phone still in hand. She glanced toward the parlor, half expecting to see the ornament shining of its own accord once more. But it remained still, merely reflecting the day's light. She took a deep breath and tried to focus on the present moment. An hour later, Jillian arrived. She shrugged off her coat, exchanging pleasantries with Esther before they settled by the fireplace. The parlor was warm, the logs crackling in a comforting tempo. Outside, the wind battered the eaves, a howling reminder of the winter storm raging beyond their walls. They sipped coffee, discussing holiday traditions, sharing bittersweet stories about Christmases gone by. Eventually, the conversation circled back to the ornament. Jillian set her cup down and nodded toward the tree. "May I see it up close?" she asked, a hint of trepidation in her voice. Esther swallowed. "Sure." Together they approached the tree. The ornament glimmered as they drew near, its swirling patterns appearing more intricate than ever. Jillian reached out, fingertips hovering just above the glass. "I can't explain why," Jillian said softly, "but it makes me feel uneasy, like it's watching me." She pulled her hand back as though scalded. Esther placed a reassuring hand on her friend's shoulder. "You're just spooked by the story Henry told me. Well, I did see something last night, but it's probably grief. I've been thinking so much about Frank. Maybe my mind is conjuring phantoms." Jillian nodded, though her gaze never left the orb. "Still, I don't like it. I don't think you should keep it." A shadow flickered across Esther's face. "I know you mean well, but this is the first time I've felt a spark of excitement in months. Just give it a chance. Let's see if this unsettling feeling passes." Reluctantly, Jillian agreed, though a wrinkle of worry lingered between her eyebrows. They stepped away from the tree, and Esther turned on some Christmas music, traditional carols to lighten the atmosphere. To her relief, the tension eased. The two friends chatted about recipes, traded stories of childhood holidays, and for a while, the ornament became a mere decoration. Time passed in a pleasant lull. As afternoon melted into evening, Jillian prepared to leave for a small family gathering. Esther walked her to the door. They exchanged one last hug before Jillian braved the cold wind outside. The door shut, leaving Esther alone in the quiet. She tried to distract herself, tidying the kitchen, wrapping some last-minute gifts, tending to the fireplace. But her thoughts kept straying back to the ornament. An inexplicable tug drew her into the parlor, as though an invisible hand guided her steps. She stopped a few feet from the tree, heartbeat throbbing in her ears. The house was darker now, with only a few lamps lit. That mild winter dusk had deepened, transforming every corner into murky shadows. A hush fell, and she swore she heard the faintest hum, a reverberation in the pit of her stomach. Slowly she edged forward, eyes locked on the ornament. What she saw next made her blood run cold. Reflected in the glossy surface of the orb was her parlor. Furniture, walls, the glowing fire. But the details were warped, as if viewed through a dream. And there, amid the distorted reflections, something moved. It was a human figure, stepping forward from the far corner of the room in the ornament's image. Esther turned on her heel, heart hammering. The corner behind her was empty. No one was there. Yet in the ornament's reflection, the figure took another step, reaching out with a trembling hand. Esther couldn't make out a face, but the silhouette seemed familiar. Her mind raced, half certain it might be Frank, half terrified it was something else entirely. Squeezing her eyes shut, she took a breath. The logical part of her screamed that she was hallucinating, that it was impossible for a reflection to contain something that wasn't in the room. And yet there it was. Gathering her courage, she peeked again. The figure was gone, leaving only the swirl of crimson and gold behind. Shaken, Esther backed away. She considered taking the ornament down right then and there, but an odd sense of longing rooted her in place. Suppose it was Frank's spirit, drawn to her by the ornament's magic. She didn't want to sever that connection if it meant a chance to feel his presence, even in the barest, strangest way. The clock chimed from the hallway, signaling evening's approach. Esther lit a few more candles, hoping their glow would stave off the creeping darkness. She tried to lose herself in mundane tasks, organizing Christmas cards, watering her poinsettias. Yet every so often she'd catch herself glancing toward the parlor, heart skipping a beat as she imagined the ornament pulsing in the gloom. Outside, the wind howled, building to a fever pitch. Snow drummed against the window panes, threatening to bury the streets by dawn. Esther decided to call it an early night. She powered down the house's lights, leaving only the gentle twinkle of the Christmas tree. She stood at the parlor doorway, watching the ornament's faint glow. If she hadn't known better, she'd swear it dimmed and brightened as though breathing. Before heading upstairs, she mustered the nerve to whisper, "Frank, if that's you, please give me a sign." Her voice quivered, and she waited. Heartbeats stretched endlessly. The ornament glistened, silent. Turning away, Esther ascended the creaking stairs to her bedroom, feeling foolish for inviting ghosts. Her grief was raw enough without adding midnight apparitions to the mix. But as she drifted off to sleep, a single thought pulsed in her mind. Something inside that ornament wanted to get out. The house was eerily still at midnight. In the parlor's velvet shadows, the ornament emitted a soft, trembling glow, distorting the reflection of the unlit fireplace. Had anyone been there to see it, they might have noticed flickers of movement deep within the glass, as though silhouettes prowled the edges of the orb's swirling innards. Upstairs, Esther tossed fitfully, a nightmare unfolding behind her eyelids. She saw twisted corridors lined with antique mirrors, each reflecting her face, only older, decaying. In her dream, every time she passed another mirror, a spectral voice whispered her name. Then she found herself standing before the ornament, its surface filled with burning eyes, all of them staring straight at her. She woke with a shuddering gasp, drenched in cold sweat, heart racing in her chest. Downstairs, the old grandfather clock ticked ominously in the silence, offering no comfort. And from somewhere behind the walls, or perhaps from within the orb itself, a faint voice called her name. Esther held her breath, unsure if she was dreaming or awake. But the night stretched on, and the sense of being watched would not let her rest. Morning broke beneath an angry sky, snow piling high against Esther Montgomery's front door. The house felt colder than ever, as if each gust of wind outside siphoned away the very warmth of the walls. She rose from her restless sleep, exhaustion evident in the dull ache behind her eyes. Despite the early hour, she sensed that this day would not unfold peacefully. Downstairs, the parlor was quiet, but ominously so. The Christmas tree, still laden with ornaments, twinkled with a fatigued glow. At its topmost branch, that haunting sphere of crimson and gold seemed dimmer than before, yet somehow more alive. Its faint shine pulsed in time with her own jittery heartbeat. Esther paused at the threshold, apprehension coiling in her belly. She forced herself to examine the ornament carefully. Had it changed overnight? The patterns within looked thicker, swirling in layered loops, as if new strands of color had been added in her sleep. She told herself it was just her imagination. Still, she couldn't ignore the low hum that drifted in her ears whenever she got too close. Whether it was real or phantom, she couldn't say. A sudden knock at the door disrupted her thoughts, making her jump. She hurried to answer, finding a wind-blown Gillian standing on the porch, wrapped in a heavy scarf. Snow clung to her boots, and her expression was a mix of relief and worry. "Esther, are you all right?" Gillian asked, stepping inside with an urgent demeanor. "I tried calling, but the phone just rang and rang." Esther felt her breath catch. I must not have heard it. Or perhaps the lines are down because of the storm. What's wrong?" Gillian removed her scarf, eyes flicking toward the parlor. "I spoke to Henry Cooper. He told me more about that ornament, about its history." Esther's heart quickened. What else is there to know? Gillian hesitated. Apparently it's more than just a cursed trinket. People who once owned it reported strange disappearances, family members who vanished after becoming too attached to the ornament's reflections. Some believed their loved ones were literally absorbed into the glass, trapped in some sort of limbo. She stopped, voice trembling. Henry said that if you notice changes, like swirling patterns or fleeting faces, it means the ornament is, in his words, feeding. A flutter of nausea gripped Esther's stomach. She recalled the phantom figure from the night before. If it was feeding, did that mean she was losing herself or something else? Gillian placed a hand on Esther's shoulder. "We need to destroy it. Today." Esther flinched, torn between fear and a clinging hope that somehow this ornament might connect her to Frank's spirit. "Destroy it? But what if Frank really is trying to—" "Esther." Gillian's tone was firm yet compassionate. "I know you miss him. I do too. But if Frank's spirit is around, he wouldn't want you in danger. We need to end this. We need to free whatever's trapped inside, and keep it from taking anything more." Esther swallowed hard, tears prickling her eyes. Slowly she nodded. "All right, let's do it." They armed themselves with what they had on hand: a heavy iron fireplace poker, a small hammer, and a strong plastic tarp, in case the glass shattered in a dangerous way. Esther unplugged the Christmas lights, leaving only a dim lamp. The room took on a drab, tense atmosphere, as though bracing for a fight. Standing before the tree, both women stared at the ornament. Now that they were ready to destroy it, they hesitated. The orb looked unexpectedly fragile, suspended by its thin metal hook. Yet its swirling interior churned with malicious grace. Esther took a tentative step forward, poker in hand. A chill swept over her, prickling every nerve. The ornament's swirling colors seemed to quicken as she approached, as if sensing what she intended. "Here goes," she whispered. Lifting the poker, she struck the ornament. In a flash, the orb swung violently, but it didn't crack. Instead, it let out a resonant clang, like metal meeting metal, a sound that echoed unnaturally around the room. Esther tried again, harder this time. Still, the ornament remained intact. A creeping dread rolled through her stomach. Gillian exchanged a worried glance with Esther. "How can that be possible? It's just glass." Esther lifted the poker once more, determined to shatter the cursed thing. With all her might, she swung, and just before impact, a thunderous voice boomed inside her head. Esther, don't! She gasped, nearly dropping the poker. A wave of dizziness blurred her vision, and she stumbled backward. Frank? She whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. It had been his voice, or at least it sounded like him. Jillian hurried to Esther's side. What happened? I heard... Esther's voice shook. She gazed at the ornament in disbelief. It spoke to me in Frank's voice. Jillian's expression hardened. It's trying to lure you. Don't listen. We have to break it. Before Esther could respond, the ornament's crimson and gold swirls intensified. The parlor lights flickered, and an icy wind seemed to gust through the room, even though all the doors and windows were closed. A force like invisible hands shoved both women away from the tree, sending them sprawling onto the rug. From inside the ornament came a low groan, swelling into a tormented wail. Shadows danced across the walls. For the first time, both women could see faint outlines of faces swirling within the glass. Countless souls, each contorted in silent agony. Esther clutched Jillian's arm, eyes wide. They're trapped, Esther breathed. We have to do something. Jillian steadied her trembling hands around the hammer. On 3. They rose, fear pouring through them like liquid ice. 1, 2, 3! They swung in unison. The ornament jerked wildly on its hook, deflecting both hits with a shocking metallic clang. A sharp burst of wind threw them off balance again, toppling a nearby lamp. Jillian gritted her teeth. It's resisting. Esther spotted the burning fireplace a few feet away, embers still glowing beneath the logs. Without hesitation, she scrambled to her feet, snatched the ornament from the tree, and sprinted toward the hearth. The moment her fingers closed around the orb, a jolt of cold surged up her arm. Screams echoed in her mind, a cacophony of voices pleading for freedom. Jillian stumbled behind her. Throw it in! Summoning every ounce of willpower, Esther hurled the ornament into the heart of the fire. It landed among the embers with a hiss, the swirling patterns erupting into frenzied motion. Sparks shot up the chimney, and the entire room dimmed. For one terrifying moment, it seemed as though the flames themselves recoiled from the ornament, unable to consume it. Then came a thunderous crack. A fissure appeared across the orb's surface, spiderwebbing outward. A piercing shriek reverberated within the fireplace, shaking the mantel. Esther and Jillian covered their ears as the noise rose to a supernatural pitch. The light inside the ornament throbbed bright red, brighter than any flame, then shattered in a blinding flash. When the light faded, the fireplace was silent but for the soft crackle of embers. Shards of glass lay among the coals, each fragment faintly glowing before turning dull. A sudden gust whisked up the chimney, carrying with it what felt like a sigh of countless voices, released at last. Exhausted and trembling, Esther collapsed into Jillian's arms. The parlor was lit only by the weak firelight. Smoke drifted in lazy trails, and a hush swallowed the space where the ornament's presence once thrived. Esther's mind swirled. Did it work? She whispered. Jillian nodded, eyes wet with tears. Yes, it's gone. You did it. They sat on the floor, holding each other as relief washed over them in tidal waves. Esther's gaze drifted to the fireplace, where tiny shards of glass still glowed with dying embers. One shard, no bigger than a marble, reflected the flame. For a heartbeat, Esther thought she saw Frank's face gazing back at her with gentle eyes. Then it vanished, leaving only a cold glimmer. She felt a lump rise in her throat, torn between sorrow and solace. If that had been him, then perhaps he was free. Perhaps all of them were. Later, once the storm calmed, Jillian helped sweep the remnants of shattered glass into a metal container for safe disposal. The two women exchanged few words, the shock of the ordeal hanging over them like a thick fog. Finally, with the living room restored to order and the front walk shoveled clean, Jillian prepared to go. Stay the night, Esther pleaded softly. I'd rather not be alone. Jillian nodded. Of course. They bunked together in the guest room, sharing a single lamp's glow. Neither slept deeply, too haunted by questions and half-remembered screams. But as the hours crawled on, a gentle peace settled over the house. No longer did the walls reverberate with that alien hum. The wind outside sounded merely like wind again, no longer a sinister moan. By dawn, the blizzard had passed, revealing a still and pristine morning. Sunlight poured through every window, reflecting on the untrampled snow. In the parlor, the tree stood quietly, its decorations innocent in the gentle light. Where the ornament once hung was now an empty branch, swaying slightly in the draft. Esther rose and stood before the tree, heart full of complicated emotion. The image of Frank flickered in her mind, his laugh, his tenderness, how he'd helped place the star on top of the tree every Christmas. She lifted a hand, resting it on the vacant branch. Goodbye, she whispered, unsure if she was addressing her husband or the malevolent presence they had vanquished. Jillian joined her, placing an arm around Esther's shoulders. You're safe now, she said, voice calm. Esther nodded, wiping away a tear. Safe. The The word felt foreign but good. Perhaps, in the absence of that terrible ornament, she could finally find a path toward healing. Outside, the holiday lights still glimmered in the morning sun, a reminder that, even after the darkest of nights, hope endures. As they stood together, Esther couldn't help but think she heard one last echo, a distant, grateful sigh carried on the winter breeze. Whether it was real or just her imagination, she chose to believe that the souls within the ornament, maybe even Frank, were now free to move on. And for the first time in a long while, Esther felt at peace.